The Diddy allegations are just the tip of the iceberg. According to his former bodyguard, Jane Doe, who appeared in a Fox News interview this week, the feds now have possession of videotapes seized from Diddy's mansion that contains potentially damning evidence against, quote, politicians, princes, and even preachers. Why do they always film it? Well, there's actually good reason for that. It's called sexual blackmail, and it's been going on in elite circles for over a century, since before the camera was invented. But we're going to talk more about that a little later. First, I want to go over the most recent updates on Diddy's case, full list of his allegations, and the ones I think the feds have the best chance of convicting him on. But before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment on this video. Also, keep in mind that these allegations are just that, allegations, and are taken from other news sources. He has obviously not been found guilty of anything yet. Also, I'm not a lawyer, so take that for what you will. These are my speculations based off the evidence that we have so far. Okay, so accusations against Diddy go all the way back to 1991, before he was famous. If you're my age or older, you'll remember that Diddy really shot to stardom after the Notorious B.I.G.'s first classic album, Ready to Die, was released in 1994. But back in 91, Diddy was just a young intern working at the now defunct Uptown Records, which specialized in developing and promoting R&B artists. And it was here at Uptown Records that Diddy began working with artists like Jodeci, Mary J. Blige, and even young 14-year-old Usher, who lived at Diddy's apartment for a stretch during this period. And as we know now, because that interview from 2016 resurfaced, in regards to Diddy's parties, Usher said, quote, "They were crazy. There were some pretty curious things taking place that I didn't necessarily understand," adding that Diddy introduced him to a totally different set of things when it came to sex. That is a very watered down way to say that he probably witnessed some illegal activity. But of course, we can't say for sure. What we can say for sure is that Diddy was a party boy and a freak from the beginning. He used to promote and throw huge parties, some with over 1,000 people at a time, including one in the gymnasium of the City College of New York, in which there was a stampede and 9 people were trampled to death. So there's always been weird things surrounding Diddy, but again, you didn't hear a peep about this from the media because he wasn't famous yet. So that brings me to one of his first allegations of sexual violence. Keep in mind, these are women who have come forward in the wake of singer Cassie's civil suit against Diddy, which he settled out of court with her the very next day after she filed it. The lawsuit alleged all kinds of abuse, sexual, physical, and verbal. She even claimed that he forced her to have sex with male prostitutes on camera. And it was in the wake of that lawsuit that opened the floodgates for all of these other allegations. The oldest allegation is from a woman named Liza Gardner, who filed on November 23rd of last year. She claimed that she was assaulted by Diddy and another artist named Aaron Hall back in 1991. She claims that she went to Diddy's apartment for an after party and was then assaulted by both men back to back, and then says that Diddy went over to her place a few days later and physically assaulted her because he was worried that she was going to tell on him. The second lawsuit, which was filed the same day by a woman named Joy Dickerson Neal, alleges that in 1991, she reluctantly went on a date with Combs, who intentionally drugged and sexually assaulted her after their dinner. She claims that Combs recorded the assault and showed the tape to other people. While Dickerson Neal did not go to the authorities immediately after the alleged assault, she says she did eventually file a police report with unspecified agencies in New York and New Jersey. The complaint says prosecutors told her they'd need to corroborate her allegations, but she believes possible witnesses were, quote, terrified that Combs would retaliate against them and that they would lose future business and music opportunities if they made a statement backing up her account. They were too afraid to lose access and opportunity. And that sums up everything that was wrong with the entertainment business back in the day. The internet has allowed independent artists, especially musicians, to have control over their careers in a way they never could before. They can fund and produce their own songs, put out their own music videos, and promote themselves on social media. They don't need powerful record executives and record labels and television outlets to produce and market their music. But back in the day, this was the only option. So the gatekeepers like Diddy wielded enormous power over up-and-coming singers and artists, who, by the way, are the most desperate kind of artists, in my experience, right up there with actors. Diddy had the power to get you a record deal. So when you saw or heard of crimes being committed, you kept your mouth shut. This has parallels to the Jeffrey Epstein saga. There were all sorts of decent people, scientists and businessmen who were in Epstein's orbit and on his plane and on his island, who probably witnessed his crimes but didn't say anything because they wanted access to his funding. Money and power are corrupting, and they buy silence. It's a tale as old as time. The third lawsuit was filed by a Jane Doe, so she wants to remain anonymous. She alleges that in 2003, when she was only 17 years old, she was trafficked by Diddy, flown on his private jet from Detroit to New York City, where she was plied with drugs and alcohol until she couldn't consent, and then gang at Bad Boy Studio by Diddy and several of his associates. The lawsuit also includes several photos of this Jane Doe, which she alleged were taken at the studio on that night, including one where she's sitting on Diddy's lap. Now keep in mind, the statute of limitations has long expired on the state level in New York for all three of these cases. And that's why these women are suing in civil court under what's called New York's Adult Survivor Act, which was a special provision that gave victims of sexual abuse a one-time, one-year window to sue their alleged sexual abusers and institutions, even if the statute of limitations had run out. But for the crime of sex trafficking of a minor, there is no statute of limitations under federal law. So in theory, Diddy could be tried in federal court for flying the 17-year-old Jane Doe on his private jet across state lines to New York for the purposes of soliciting sex. This falls under federal jurisdiction for the crime of sex trafficking. Once again, the same thing that eventually took down Jeffrey Epstein. Now, whether or not the feds try to charge him for this is yet to be determined. A lot has to do with eyewitness testimony for someone other than the alleged victim, meaning more people would have to come forward and be willing to testify. Sex crimes are notoriously difficult to prosecute, and I assume Diddy's lawyers could shred this witness to pieces, arguing that she doesn't remember the facts, she was intoxicated, and after all, the incident happened over 20 years ago. In my opinion, there's no way the feds would risk going to trial if their whole case rested on the testimony of this one victim. Of course, photos and videos would be helpful, which is exactly what Homeland Security was looking for when they raided his Miami and Los Angeles mansions on March 25th. And that's why the case of Rodney Lil Rod Jones is so interesting. Jones was a former producer and videographer for Diddy and lived at Diddy's home between September 2022 and November 2023. In February of this year, Jones filed a lawsuit in federal court claiming that while he was living with Diddy, he was, quote, sexually harassed, drugged, and threatened. Jones claims he was the victim of constant unsolicited and unauthorized groping and touching of his by Mr. Combs. On one occasion, the lawsuit claims, Jones woke up naked and disoriented in bed with Combs and two sex workers. He alleges the music mogul drugged him. Now get this is where it gets good. The complaint also claims that, in his role as Combs' videographer, Jones secured hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff, and his guests engaging in serious illegal activity. The illegal activity, the suit alleges, includes acquiring drugs, soliciting sex workers, providing laced drinks to minors, and sexual assault. This could be huge. Some of the footage no doubt includes the parties Diddy was throwing, even now in his 50s, that are for sure packed to the gills with cocaine and prostitutes, just like most Hollywood parties are, and attended by every bigwig in show business and popular culture, including Prince Harry. Now, there is nothing federally illegal about cocaine use or prostitution, as long as it doesn't involve minors. So just the footage of a bunch of elite people partying and being scumbags probably won't be enough to put Diddy away for life. But if the footage contains Diddy sexually assaulting underage or passed out women, as so much of his past allegations indicate, then Diddy could be facing decades in prison at least. That's if the feds release the footage. You heard me right. I'm calling it now. There is a possibility, depending on who's in those tapes, that the prosecution will decide to not use them in court. This is not some crazy conspiracy theory. The same thing happened in the case of Jeffrey Epstein. The FBI has footage right now, has the footage from the CCTV cameras inside Epstein's former penthouse on the Upper East Side of New York. Footage that could implicate and help to prosecute elites like Prince Andrew and God knows who else. But they refused to introduce the evidence in court in the cases against Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and thus protected virtually everyone else who was involved in the sex trafficking ring that abused scores and scores of underage women. The same thing could happen in the case of Diddy. According to the lawsuit filed by Lil Rod Jones, Mr. Combs was known for throwing the best parties. Affiliation with and or sponsorship of Mr. Combs' sex trafficking parties garnered legitimacy and access to celebrities such as famous athletes, political figures, artists, musicians, and international dignitaries. So, there's a lot of people that could be caught up in the dragnet if those tapes get released. Just use your imagination. Diddy knew everyone, not just in the music business, but high society, politicians, and international elites. According to his former bodyguard's interview on Fox, there's a lot of people who need to be afraid of that footage seeing the light of day. The really messed up part is that unlike Epstein or Maxwell, without this footage, I'm not sure the feds will even have enough to charge Diddy with a crime, or at least not one of the most serious crimes involving the sex trafficking of minors, which could carry up to life in prison. And that brings me to the point of this video. Why film it? I never understood why people who commit heinous crimes insist on filming themselves. It has to do with something called sexual blackmail. It's a practice that goes back centuries. Some trace its origins to late 18th century Victorian England, when laws against sodomy were exploited by the unscrupulous to extort money from people. In other words, if you were getting your freak on and doing butt stuff, someone would threaten to rat you out to the government unless you paid them. In modern times, in the United States especially, sexual blackmail has been a tool of the intelligence services like the CIA and the FBI. Most famously, the powerful New York City attorney Roy Cohn, who was a one-time mentor to Donald Trump, by the way, was known for using this kind of blackmail. He was closely linked to intelligence services like the FBI and then newly formed CIA. This happened in the 1950s and the 1960s during the Red Scare, where Congress and the intelligence services were trying to root out suspected communists. This is where Roy Cohn came in. Roy Cohn, who was himself a homosexual, would throw gay sex parties for celebrities and high-level politicians and social elites, secretly film and photograph them, and then use it as blackmail. He was said to even have photos of J. Edgar Hoover, who was rumored to be a closeted homosexual, wearing a dress. This was ironic because Hoover was the head of the FBI and was being supplied with similar compromising photos of his enemies by Roy Cohn, which Hoover used as blackmail. That brings us to today, the 21st century. It was well known that Jeffrey Epstein had at least casual links to the Mossad, which is the Israeli Secret Service. And of course, what he was doing, just like Roy Cohn back in the day, was filming his cohorts doing illegal and immoral things and using them as blackmail, probably funneling them to the Mossad or the CIA or whichever intelligence services he was working for. Now, was Diddy being used in a similar fashion as an agent or a shill of an intelligence service? I don't know, I kind of doubt it. But as we're all starting to find out, in this brave new world, anything is possible. What is almost certain, though, is that Diddy is a predator and a thug. Besides the numerous allegations of sex crimes, he's been arrested for assault. He's accused of shooting a gang member outside of a club in Los Angeles back in 2012. And then, of course, the Times Square shooting on New Year's Eve of 1999 in Midtown Manhattan, when two innocent people got shot in a club and Diddy took the cops on a high-speed chase with his then-girlfriend J-Lo. He was found in the car with an illegal gun, but somehow beat the rap, as well as the shooting inside of the club, even though he was fingered by an eyewitness. His music might be soft and fruity, and he himself probably in the closet, but make no mistake, Diddy is a gangster. But now the chips are stacking up against him, and his time might be running out. Still, I think convicting Diddy on a major charge would require the feds to use those tapes from his parties as evidence in court. And if they do that, who knows the kind of celebrities who might be getting arrested next? Or maybe, if the feds don't have enough direct evidence of Diddy committing crimes, they can find his cohorts or his entourage, build a case around them, charge them with a RICO statute, and then get them all to tell on Diddy. And that would definitely be enough to convict them. We have yet to see, but what I know for sure is before the end of this year, we are about to see some high-level people going down. All right, you guys, that's it for Illegal Business. My name is Johnny Mitchell. Thank you for liking and subscribing. We will see you next week. Take care.